Let's talk about, it's probably a conversation topic that doesn't come up much unless you're an anthropologist or maybe a religious person. The notion of sacrifice, particularly human or even child sacrifice. I know this is certainly not going to be trigger-free in light of recent violence in Uvalde and other places, Buffalo. I think there was a more recent one in Tulsa. So I'm not really so much describing those acts of violence or the violence that occurs every day, to children in abusive families, to whole groups of people, often that have unfortunately been born into a scapegoated or otherwise dehumanized ethnic or social group. I'm talking about the sacrifice that occurs to the individual human soul when it is inconvenient for the collective to face its own history of doing this, of encouraging this type of sacrifice. So it's a complex topic, and hopefully we'll stay light, at least in terms of jargon. So what we tend to do is just meet the world, see it in terms of our constructs. It makes it sort of easy to say this means this, here's what I value. Whenever someone starts a conversation with this set of premises, it means that this is someone that either knows what they're talking about or that I should be biased against, and I'm not going to listen to a word they have to say. There's not much room for novelty. And sadly, that's also a dynamic that we might encounter in our close relationships with people we actually really care about and have some sort of a psychological agenda of trying to understand in a way that transcends our own sorts of narrowed views. In other words, having enough of a novel orientation to the life of another to where we can understand them both as they understand themselves, and then also perhaps having some patient and hopefully even an appreciation of their experience that's rooted in sort of a foundational dignity. The trouble is that's not what we always experience at the hands of others. And there are so many ways that these indignities and these dismissals of our experience can be discounted, just even in a heartbeat, in a subtle look or tone, or even in an inflection of words, or even just using certain language like I am to suggest that some kind of a devaluation might be about to take place in favor of another perspective that's that could be sabotaging of that of one's own subjective views. What happens when this happens on such a large scale that all that's left is essentially a mentality where the subjective experience of each implicit self is intentionally violated? Where, if you don't see it this way, that must mean that you're, shameful. Well, unfortunately, this opens the door to a host of defensive mechanisms, especially projection and projective identification. If you treat someone in a one down and shaming position, systematically enough, well, that person will act in ways that then could be called shameful. However, isn't it shameful to do that to them in the first place? These types of knots are so widespread as to have formed the basis of an entire social structure. And then here comes, somebody like me, or somebody that's perhaps even a bit more reactive to rush in like an iconoclast and start tearing it up. Well, this individual then is failing to assign dignity and recognize the dilemma of those that they're trashing to such an extent that, we essentially have a war, an erotic enactment between the dehumanization and the campaign against the subjectivity of another person that's then being met with sort of a rhyming campaign on the other end. In other videos, this might come across in language about the sort of complementarity of narcissistic and masochistic or borderline or even avoidant models. In many cases, the avoidant individual has a war being waged against themselves, but it can also be manifested interpersonally in a number of passive-aggressive or even outright, forms of protest that essentially where everyone lives needing to sacrifice everyone else. And many individuals are ascribed sort of power or blindness to this by having already so successfully sacrificed their own emotional lives to where they can do it to others without really even thinking. It's a bleak situation when this happens in such a manner as what's taken place in our society. And it erupts into a situation where it really does seem very much worthwhile to fight. And this is why I recommend maybe fighting with a bit more strategy, with an understanding of the dynamics that are at play, rather than simply a mutual dehumanization of anyone who is other. In so doing, I welcome any critique that I may be turning against that mission to fight injustice, because it's simply not true. We have to choose wisely what interpersonal circumstances are sufficiently complex to give us leverage with regard to our own hardwired instincts to defend against shame, our own instincts to close off the recognition of the other, which may be in some ways equally valid. One fairly common example is where two individuals in an intimate relationship have conflicting needs for a type of either interpersonal or isolating self-regulation. Let's say one partner really needs reassurance that they're not unloved, at the conclusion of some kind of a argument or a fight, and the other person really needs distance because they feel backed into a corner where they're likely to respond with a fight or flight response. So in this case, the first partner is really asking the angry partner who's trying to self-regulate to please regulate yourself so that I can have enough of a space to no longer feel this tremendous fear of being attacked. And yet, as they're asking this, what they're sensing is this communication, this at least initially nonverbal protest from deep within the other that says, I'm not handling this again. I'm not going to keep doing this. I want to destroy this. And so they have an increasing need for interpersonal regulation. And at the same time, the latter, the person wishing to withdraw, and I think you'll recognize some themes of Bowlby's attachment theory here with regard to preoccupied and avoidant styles, but I think that's valuable, but it's not a good place just to leave a conversation. But at any rate, the more avoidant partner would then essentially be asking the more preoccupied one to take care of this yourself so that I can feel like you're respecting my need to escape you so that I can come back to you in a better way. And it's really hard, if we think of it like that, to not see the validity in both positions. And not only is it a valid position logically, but we're talking about a need that goes beyond even just the conceptual mind, but really something that's pressing on the hearts and minds of both partners in a fairly intense way. Anyone who's drowning needs the person on the boat to throw them a lifesaver. Anyone who's feeling cornered needs space so they can not lash out. What we need is novelty. We need to be able to see one another in a position that's not strictly confined to these feedback loops. And for individuals with their early development in these types of sacrificing families, where either emotions or the recognition of what is nurturant and an abusive way of raising a child, when these groups need to essentially sacrifice that accountability and that awareness in order to protect themselves from their own traumas. The product of such families are often divided between the need for love and connection and also the need for safety. Safety from either that type of cloying, hostage-taking manipulation, it would seem, to the point of then manifesting an aggressive response where a loving response would be more appropriate, or of the fear for abandonment by someone that matters very much. So there's a lot to be said about this topic, and frankly, I think we have whole societies based on the notion of sacrificing this humanity for a defensive process. And then to attack that seems like itself the the very act of sacrifice that's is being perpetrated upon the other. I hope this was clear enough. We'll probably come back and maybe elaborate a bit more on certain details there. But I hope it's enough to maybe bring all of us more into a space of novelty, of curiosity, of not just assuming that this should be easy or simple, because that would sacrifice the real acknowledgement of how challenging it really can be to find our way into a world of living with other people.